What's up, my wizards? It's Deb. From Mtg, we like magic, and I got my hair cut a little bit too short, so it's going to be like a week until my head looks right. But let's get past that, because today we're going to cover my favorite and perhaps the biggest story from Pro Tour 25th Anniversary. Now, in the standard portion of the event, there was a sea of red-black and mono-green aggro decks, plus offshoots like mono-red and green-black aggro, and if you put them all together, it was like 50% of the total meta over the weekend. But as impressive as that sounds, one deck emerged through the mist to become the toast of the weekend. Everyone's been talking about this deck for the last couple of days, and I don't blame them. This deck is equal parts funk, junk, and crunk, and that makes for a really, really cool deck. So today, I'm excited to bring you Bant Turbo Fog, aka Fog of Fate, because the deck is, in fact, in many ways built around Nexus of Fate, which is the Core Set 2019 Buy a Box promo, which is fairly problematic in a few ways. You know, this card was kind of expensive when it first came out, and then it slowly worked its way down to the $20 mark, but after its performance over the weekend, it is more than doubled in price, and it has in fact become the most expensive card in Standard. A little bit of trivia for you, you know. It joins things like Teferi, Karn, Nicol Bolas, and getting above the $35 mark, and that is awful, but, you know, they've tried to remedy that situation on Magic Online a little bit by, I believe, making it more common in treasure chests, but I don't know how they're going to fix it as far as paper Magic goes. Maybe an emergency printing in the next set, in the Ravnica set, you know, just get rid of whatever garbage blue mythic you were going to print and make this card available in booster packs, because until it is, the price could get even more out of control. But enough with pricing concerns. I know that that is a real issue, but this is a deck tech. We're talking about what the cards do and what the deck does and all that. So what does this card do for this deck? Well, the whole idea behind the deck is actually just to get to a point in the game where you're taking effectively infinite turns with Nexus of Fate, because you have multiple on the battlefield ways of not spending too much mana, but still finding a Nexus of Fate in a given turn. You have Planeswalker that draw you cards, you have, you know, Search for Escanta to draw you cards, you've got spells to draw you cards. So all you have to do is draw enough cards, or see enough cards, in a given turn, and you're bound to eventually come across a Nexus of Fate, which you can cast and then take another turn to find Nexus of Fate. And eventually, you use all these turns you've strung together to win off of one of your Planeswalkers. Now, this sounds like a Christmas Land scenario, but the later you get into the game, the more you dig into your library, the more easy it is to find a copy of Nexus of Fate turn after turn after turn, because theoretically there won't ever be less than 4 copies in your library at any given time. So once you get down to half of your library, it's incredibly easy to find a Nexus every single turn, and you've got more than enough mana to not only cast it, but do other stuff on that turn if you have to. So again, once the game goes long enough, it's actually fairly easy to execute this game plan. But therein lies the problem, you know. This is not a cheap spell. Nexus costs 7 mana to cast. So getting to the point in the game where you can cast it just the one time is difficult enough, but getting to the point where you can cast it over and over and over is a whole other story entirely. So you've got to extend the game somehow, or maybe even speed up the game on your end to where you can get to Nexus faster. And the deck actually tries to do both. It plays a ramp package, but it can also extend the game via fogs. This deck plays 8 different fogs: Haze of Pollen and Root Snare. Now, fogs are not usually very good, but in a format dominated completely by aggro decks, which is mostly what we're seeing nowadays. Again, red-black, mono-red, mono-green, green-black, plus constrictor decks and stuff like that. There are a ton of creature decks in this format right now, and fog is a very effective tool when pretty much every deck in the format, minus 1 or 2, is trying to kill you by attacking with creatures as quickly as they can. See, the deck just approaches playing Magic in like a fundamentally different way that these aggro decks just aren't prepared for. They can't fight against a fog on virtually every turn of the game. I mean, basically, like right now, red-black and mono-green, their entire game plan is about improving their attack step. You know, they tap out during their main phase to improve their attack step as much as possible as the turns roll on, which is obviously, you know, a pretty consistent strategy for an aggro deck. Just curve out and try to get as much out of your attack step as you can. But these cards allow you to just completely take that strategy away from an opponent, and if that's all they're banking on, that's going to be really good against them. And these fogs have proven to be really good in a format with almost nothing but aggro decks. One more thing before I move past the fogs, because this is what made it click for me as far as like how good the matchup is against aggro. 6 different players were playing this deck at the Pro Tour. 6 different players. That's a lot. And among all of their sideboard slots, only a few of those slots, for all 6 players, were devoted to beating the aggro matchup. Most of the players on this deck were basically just not sideboarding out anything at all, or sideboarding in anything at all against the aggro matchup. Just leave the whole 60 the same. That's because the matchup is so good against aggro that you literally don't have to change a thing about your deck in game 2 and 3 to just decimate them. But fogs aren't the only thing we got going for us. Like I said earlier, the deck also features a slight ramp package, and this is where we hit some variants among the different people running the deck over the weekend at the Pro Tour. Now, the list I'm showing you today is Raphael Levy's deck list, because I really like and respect Raphael Levy, so I wanted to show you his list, but there are some variants in the way these lists were put together over the weekend, and when you get to the ramp package, that's when you hit the first sort of patch of variants. Now, Raph chose to play 4 copies of Gift of Paradise, which was universal among all the decks, but he also plays 2 copies of Beneath the Sands, which wasn't entirely universal. We also saw Spring to Mind in this slot in a couple of the lists, but for the most part, Beneath the Sands was the ramp piece of choice. Not going to understand that. Again, when you're in the late game and the entire purpose of your turns is just getting another Nexus of Fate, sometimes it's really important to have cards that aren't dead when you draw them, like this would be. You can cycle it away in the hopes of getting another Nexus, and that can be really important in the very late turns. Conversely, Gift of Paradise can be important in the early turns, because this deck will routinely go down to like 2, 3, 4 life. It'll go very, very low before it can either stabilize or just otherwise turn the corner, turn the game around. So this deck will get really, really low some of the time against aggro decks before it can actually do what it's supposed to do, and it will finish the game in those situations, but things get really tense. And a card like Gift of Paradise can really take some of the pressure off, gain you some life back, which matters not only in the early game, but also in the late game when you're doing your Nexus turns. If you don't find a Nexus, playing a couple of Gift of Paradises can really help you say go and be okay with that decision. And by the way, that's a function of the fogs as well. I should have brought that up. The fogs also allow you to take a few Nexus turns, and if you don't find a Nexus, it's very likely that you drew a fog in all of that card drawing. So you can say go, play your fog, and then get right back to your business. But let's talk about the card draw in the deck, because this is another integral part of the deck. Again, you really want to dig as much as you can in order to find a Nexus on literally every turn after you get 7 mana. So, with that in mind, pretty much every deck played either 2 or 3 Search for Azcanta. Raph played 3, and I think that is the right number, because Search is just so ridiculous when you're digging for a specific card. Especially, again, given that no matter how small your deck might get, there's always going to be, theoretically, 4 copies of Nexus of Fate in there. So, with that in mind, Search for Azcanta digging 4 cards for you is amazing when you only have like 30 or 25 cards left in your deck. It almost guarantees that you find a Nexus on just about every turn. But after Search for Azcanta, players were in a lot less agreement over how to use their card draw slots. Now, Raph went with 4 Anticipate, which again, I think might be the right choice, although we saw a lot in these slots, A lot of people played Chart a Course, especially the people who are also playing the Mirari Conjecture, because Chart a Course would be one of the few sorceries you could actually get back with a Conjecture, so if you're playing Conjecture in your deck, we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few cards. Don't worry, we'll get back to it. If you're playing Conjecture, Chart a Course is probably the right choice. But we also saw a split between like Secrets of the Golden City and Glimmer of Genius, both of which are awesome cards. Secrets looks especially good when you're super late in the game. You've got the City's Blessing. All you're trying to do is draw a Nexus. It allows you to draw 3 cards for 3 mana, which is pretty raw. That's really good. But overall, I like Anticipate the most because it allows you to see 3 cards for just 2 mana. And when you put the 2 cards in the bottom of your library, that'll just push up any copies of Nexus that are in your deck. So I like a lot about Anticipate. I think it is the right call. But again, if you're playing Mirari, you're going to need sorceries. So I think Chart a Course is the right way to go in that case. But we'll talk a little bit about why you might make that decision slightly later, because I really need to get down to how you actually win the game. I sort of vaguely said earlier that you win the game with a Planeswalker. And we are playing 3 different Planeswalkers in this deck, although not every single player played 3 Planeswalkers. We almost universally saw 4 copies of Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. This is the most important card other than Nexus of Fate in the entire deck, so we get the entire playset all the time. But there's also 2 copies of Karn, Scion of Urza in just about every version of this deck right now. The difference between Raph's deck and a lot of other players' decks was that he elected for 2 Nissa Steward of Elements, and there were a couple of players who didn't play Nissa in the main, but did play her in the side. It's a common card to see, but it wasn't in every main. Now, the common theme between all three of these is that they all allow us to dig for a Nexus of Fate. I've said that a million times in this video, but again, take that away. If nothing else, we're trying to dig for a Nexus of Fate in the later turns so we can cast it every single turn. And Teferi lets you draw cards and can function as an effective form of ramp, especially when you remember that Nexus of Fate is an instant. So he allows you to cast spells maybe on your turn or your opponent's turn, and then still have mana left over to Nexus of Fate at the end of their turn. So that's pretty sweet, but drawing the card is what you're really interested in. Same thing with Karn. Karn allows you to effectively draw cards, but it's also a way of winning the game outright. Now, a lot of how you win the game revolves around Teferi's ultimate, because you'll just blow away their entire side of the board. At that point, you can say go, and it doesn't matter. What are they going to play a land, you know? So a lot of people will just scoop to Teferi's ultimate, but if they demand that you kill them with damage, Karn can do that, as can Nissa, which is another reason to keep her in the main deck. You know, this is just another way to kill them if you absolutely have to, because you'll just be able to ultimate her. You know, once you've taken your 34th turn in a row, you'll be able to ultimate her and, you know, just swing for the kill. So both Karn and Nissa are good for that, but for the most part, people just scoop to Teferi's ultimate actually happening. Now, there's one more slot in the deck, and people really chose to do different things with this slot. Now, there are a few cards that I haven't covered yet that I'll get to a little bit later in the video, but the main split here between players was whether or not to play the Mirari Conjecture, talked about that a little bit earlier, or what Raphael and a couple of other players went with, which was Oath of Teferi. Now, the main attraction here isn't necessarily the first bit of text on Oath of Teferi, although it does allow you to reset one of your Karns or Teferis, which is kind of nice, but mostly here, you're looking for that second bit of text, which allows you to activate Planeswalkers twice in a turn. That's insane, because it allows you to draw 2 cards with Teferi, untap a total of 4 lands. That's insane. Plus, you can put, sometimes, you know, multiple cards, 3 cards down, and they'll literally never see those cards again, because you're taking infinite turns, you know? So it's just effective removal if you haven't ultimated yet. Plus, with Karn, you're able to, you know, let's say you +1 Karn, they see a Nexus of Fate and a garbage card, but they're going to give you the garbage card. Well, with Oath of Teferi out, you get to activate Karn twice in a turn, meaning that you're effectively able to just get the Nexus of Fate, no matter what, if you +1 for it. So I like that, you know, even if they exile it away, you can still get it in the same turn. Plus, Nissa can just kill them with double ultimates in one turn, you know, that's 20 damage in all. With 2 Nissa ultimates. So there's plenty of reasons why the, you know, Oath of Teferi is really, really stupid in this deck. Mostly, it takes the pressure off. You know, again, main reason that the deck exists, the main function of the deck, is to find a Nexus of Fate every single turn. And if your Planeswalkers can effectively draw you double the cards, well then, you're going to find the Nexus a lot more consistently. But some people went with Mirari Conjecture for somewhat similar reasons. You know, Mirari Conjecture can not only get you back fogs and stuff like that, which can be really, really important later on in the game for staying alive until you can actually get a Nexus. But it lets you get back sorceries and stuff. That's why people are playing the Chart of Courses and the Secrets of the Golden City and stuff. And really importantly, it allows you to either double up on card draw, you know, double up on secrets and draw 6 cards or something, or just double up on Nexus and take 2 extra turns, and yeah, it does work that way. So Mirari Conjecture looks super bomb in this deck, and I might myself end up playing it over Oath of Teferi, but I definitely get the attraction to Oath of Teferi too. Now, the deck plays 26 lands, and in this build, there are 15 blue sources, 14 green sources, and 13 white sources. I think that's about right. I've only gotten in a few reps with the deck, so I'm not going to tell you that it's the perfect mana base, but this is the mana base that just about every player at the Pro Tour decided on, so it's looking good enough for me, and it hasn't given me too many problems in the very few games I've actually been able to get in with the deck. Now, here's the sideboard of Raphael's deck, although I do want to address there are a couple of different sideboards, but most of them involved playing a heavy amount of Jace's Defeat and Negate. You know, 4 copies of both of these in most of the sideboards, because the only real matchup we care about shoring up is the control matchup. Again, we're insanely good in the aggro matches, and we usually won't have to sideboard anything in or out in games 2 and 3. So we're mostly, you know, able, in that case, it's actually a great thing, because we're able to to free up all the sideboard slots to one bad matchup, and that is blue-white control. So not only do we have the Jace's Defeat and the negates, but we've also got Carnage Tyrant, which is a knockout against those decks. They have to find the Fumigator to settle the wreckage, or they're just pretty much done, and having this many Carnage Tyrants really helps, win the game over the long run. So, but I will say that some people chose to, instead of playing Carnage Tyrant, and this will really help out the budget because Carnage Tyrants are like $16, $17 a piece. You could just play a couple of copies of Baral, Chief of Compliance in this slot, along with like a Nezahal, is how a lot of people handled this. You'd play Nezi instead as your knockout, threat out of the sideboard. But Baral allows you to get even more value out of the counter spells that you've sided in and lets you find your Nexus of Fate even faster. So I like that plan a lot too. But obviously post-rotation, Carnage Tyrant looks like it's going to be the weapon of choice if this deck continues. Actually, one more thing I want to talk about just briefly before we go here is if you wanted to decrease the budget just slightly, you have to play expensive cards. You have to play Teferi, you have to play Nexuses, Nexi, I'm not really sure. You have to play Nexus of Fate. So you have to play expensive cards, but Karn and Carnage Tyrant are also super expensive. And I've already talked about how you can bring down the budget a bit in the sideboard and not play Carnage Tyrant, but as far as Karn, that's another like $70 you really don't want to have to spend. Well, you could just play like Patient Rebuilding in this slot, and that would be fine. Patient Rebuilding helps you draw cards just like Karn does, and it's a win condition eventually if you take enough turns, just like Karn is too. So, Patient Rebuilding is what, like 40 cents, 50 cents, something like that. I could definitely see playing in this slot if you can't afford the cards. It's just a thought. But I'm pretty sure I've covered every card that's either in the deck or could be in the deck or has been seen in the deck at this point. And I'm not going to do power rankings this time around. Don't click away. Don't leave just yet, you guys. But I'm not going to do power rankings just because I haven't gotten in enough time with the deck yet. I've gotten in very few reps, and I just wouldn't feel comfortable doing power rankings at all. So, the deck feels seriously like a low to mid 60s. The deck, it's not super powerful. It plays some powerful cards, but it also plays like 8 fogs, So it doesn't seem super powerful on paper. It's pretty, it's obviously synergistic. It's obviously resilient. That's probably the number one part about the deck, but it's got like no offense. It's the slowest deck in Standard. It's obviously a 1 in the speed department. The deck will go to time while you're trying to learn it, so do remember that. And even then, you got to be rocking and rolling to not go to time. So keep that in mind. But the deck is super slow. It's pretty consistent. The deck could put up some good numbers, but a lot of the numbers are going to be relatively low in traditional categories. But just don't let that fool you. This deck is perfect for this meta game right now, especially depending on what your local meta is. If you're running up against nothing but aggro decks, if you've got the Skrill to play the deck, this is the deck to play. And, if the deck is, like, expensive. Let me just say that one more time. The deck is, like, $500 in between the Teferis and the Karns and the Nexuses of Fate and the $50 mana base, and the Carnage Tyrants. The deck is expensive, but if you are going to acquire the deck anytime soon, you can probably play it for a good long time. Like, it doesn't lose that much to rotation, honestly. Like, it loses a fog to rotation, which could be a problem, but if we see another fog printed in Ravnica, then the deck is right back online, doesn't even skip a beat, really. So this deck could have a long life in Standard. So if you wanted to build a deck now, all they have to do is print one more fog, and the deck is right back for the next, year or more. So try this thing out if you got the cash, or just proxy it up. That's what I did. I don't have 4 Nexus of Fate. You think I'm crazy? So I proxied this deck up. And it's a fun deck to play, let me tell you that much, especially against aggro decks and stuff. The deck is so fun because they hate it. They hate it. So, and by the third time you fog them, they know you have the fog and they can't stand your face. So give this thing a shot if you want to give them conniption fits. It's definitely good for that. And if you're interested in looking at the deck, you know what to do by now. Just click the first link in the description down there. That'll take you over to my sponsors at TCG Player. They're good folks over there at the TCOG Player. They're nice. They help keep me on the air. They sponsor my content, and they are the lowest place you can get this deck on the internet. This deck is seriously no joke, like $550, $600 on some websites, and Nexus of Fate is out of control. If you were going to buy the deck, you might want to buy it now before Nexus of Fate gets back to like $80 or whatever. So if you're going to buy it anywhere, TCG Player is the place to buy it because they have the lowest prices on any cards. Teferis and stuff, Karns, $40, $50 on other websites, $35 on theirs. So if you're going to buy it anywhere, make sure it's their website, click the link. But aside from that, just on your way out, do all the YouTube stuff, you know, share the video on your social media if you would do that for me. It only takes you a second. It's not too much to ask, but it helps me out like tremendously if you get the video around, and the deck definitely deserves to have the word spread about it because the deck is awesome. So, you know, I've always loved Turbo Fog and Pauper, and Turbo Fog has existed in many forms throughout Magic history, and this is just the newest incarnation, and it's super fun to play. If anyone out there likes Turbo Fog the way I do, you want to try this thing out. So make sure you share the video around, like the video on your way out, just click the thumbs up button, subscribe if you're new. Really, really close to 100K now, just hit 93 last night, so we're almost there, guys. Help me out, get me to 100K, and that's about it. You know, join the Patreon if you want to. $1 a month. I'll let you know what decks and videos are coming out before I put them out. You can vote on what decks you want to see coming up later. So a lot of cool stuff for $1 on the Patreon. Click the link in the description if you're interested in that. Aside from that, follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev, and I'm pretty sure I'm tapped out for now. So I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.